Hi everyone, I'm Allie with the Potomac Bead Company, and I'm going to go over with you how to do a snakeskin peyote with SuperDuos, and I'm going to do it in a diagonal fashion doing a design. You can use this same pattern even if you're doing regular beads and not SuperDuos. So once you learn the diagonal pattern for peyote, you can do it with any bead that you want to do. I'm going to be using 3 different colors of green of SuperDuos. I'm using the Jade SuperDuo, the Crystal Green Luster, and the Emerald Matte. And then you're going to also use some 11Os. I'm using the Matte Metallic Tawny Gray. Kind of matches with everything. It's a good CB to have. You need a clasp. I'm going to use one of our cup buttons. Some thread, 0.008 wildfire beading thread in white is what I'm using. You need 1 needle. A size 10 English beading needle is preferred. And usually for your needle, you're going to need some sort of a cutter, either a good wire cutter or scissors, and then also a needle nose plier is going to help to flatten out your cording. In addition, you may want some super glue at the ends to do your knots, but that's up to you. So I have cut my thread ahead of time. I have about 5 feet of thread. It's going to depend on how long you want your bracelet to be, or you need it to be. That's going to determine how much thread you need. I've threaded my needle, just 1 needle at the end of my thread, and I've added a stop bead. Here I have just a 6-0 bead in root beer color, matte root beer, as my stop bead. And you want to leave yourself at least about 6 or 7 inches at the end of that stop bead because you're going to do a clasp on it. If you're going to do a big clasp, you may even want to use more. What I'm going to do to start out is start my pattern, which is going to be my jade color, and then my luster, and then my emerald green. In between the seed beads, I'm going to put 2, or in between the SuperDuos, I'm going to put 2 11Os. So I have my jade, 2 11s, my luster, 2 11s, and then my emerald. And I'm going to let that all drop down next to my stop bead. Once I have that pattern established, I'm going to pick 3 SuperDuos. This is going to, or 3 seed beads. It's going to do a little bit of a picot trim. And I'm going to go back through the top hole of the SuperDuo that I was coming out of. I'm going to give a nice tight pull, and that's going to create a little bit of a peak there at the end. Whatever color I'm coming out of as I go towards the stop bead is the color that I'm going to put on. So I'm coming out of an emerald, I'm going to put on an emerald. So through the luster bead, and then I'm going to put on a luster bead. At the end here, I'd sew through my turquoise, and then, you guessed it, I'm going to put on a turquoise. Again, this can be however many wide you want it to be, that's up to you. What I'm going to do when I get to the end here then, is my little picot trim. I have my 3 seed beads on, and I'm going back away from the stop bead now, and through the top hole of the last SuperDuo that I put on. Give a little pull. When I'm going away from the stop bead, sewing away, I'm going to add the colors that I'm sewing into. So I have my little luster color there that I'm adding because I'm sewing into a luster. You can see that diagonal starting already. I have an emerald because I'm sewing into an emerald. When you get to the end, you're not sewing into anything, so you're going to look what's at the beginning. And I'm going to add one of my turquoise. And then 3 stop beads, or 3 seed beads, back through the top hole of the SuperDuo that I just added. Give a nice tight little pull. Now again, I'm sewing towards the stop bead. So when I'm going towards the stop bead, I'm adding on the color that I'm coming out of. So I'm coming out of a jade bead. I'm going to add a jade bead. I'm coming out of the emerald. I add an emerald. I'm coming out of a luster, and I'm going to add a luster. I add my 3 seed beads here, so back through the top hole of my luster. Now as I'm sewing away from the seed bead, again it's going to be whatever I'm sewing into. So as you go towards the stop bead. As you go towards the stop bead, it's whatever bead you're coming out of that you're going in, that you're going to add. When you're going away from the stop bead, it's whatever bead you're going into. So I'm going to go into an emerald, so I add an emerald. Going into a jade, so I add a jade. And then again, I'm at the end and there's no bead to go into, so I look back on the other side as to what I need to add. Also, if you're doing a pattern of 3 or the same pattern over and over, it's easy to look and figure out because you only have 3 beads. So you know each time you need to add 1 color of each. I add my 3 beads on the side and I go back through the top hole of the last bead that I added. At the end of each row, give a little bit of a nice tug and keep going. So I'm going towards my stop bead, so whatever bead I'm coming out of, that's the bead color that I put on. So I put on my luster bead, there's my jade bead, and I'm going to put on a jade bead. Coming out of the emerald bead, I'm going to put on an emerald bead. Letting that drop down next to my pattern there, and add my 3 seed beads back through the top hole. Again, I'm sewing away from in the opposite direction of the stop bead, so whatever bead I'm going into is the color that I add. Add a jade bead, sew into a jade bead. Add a luster bead, sew into a luster bead. And there you have it. And looking back at the beginning is the emerald, so I'm going to add the emerald. And that's how I'm going to do the pattern. I'll do some more off screen, but you can see that nice diagonal row there starting to happen, and we're going to continue building on to that diagonal. So here I'm continuing with my pattern, just showing the diagonal, and the diagonal will be 6 SuperDuos high because it's double the amount of rows. So you're doing 3 wide and you're going to have 6 in your diagonal line. And you can change the diagonal and do V's too. Once you have it established, it's really easy to see the pattern that's going. And again, I'm just continuing. As I'm continuing towards my stop bead, I'm going to add the color that I'm sewing out of. As I go away, I'm adding the color that I'm sewing into. Now that I'm at the end of one of my rows, I've done my little picot trim on the side and I'm getting ready to come back. When I'm coming back, I'm going to repeat the pattern at the start, where instead of adding SuperDuos, I'm adding 2 11-Os in their place. So I'm going to pick up 2 11-Os, and I'm going to sew into the empty hole of the next SuperDuo. Again, add 2 beads into the next empty hole. When I get to the corner, I'm going to disguise the corner here, the corner turn, with a tiny bit of a fake picot. And I'm going to use 2 beads instead of 3, and I'm going to put my needle in there between the last 2 beads and going into the second hole of the very last bead here at the end of the row. I'm going to put those in there. So that way it just makes the end look a little bit more decorated and it doesn't look like there's something missing and empty there. What I'm going to do now is add my cup button. So I'm going to come up through the back of my cup button, adding it, and I'm going to put a SuperDuo in the middle of it just to give it a little bit of color match. To do so, I'm going to snake my needle back through my SuperDuos in a straight line. So I'm going through my 2 turquoise ones there, and I'm going to come out my SuperDuo so that I'm coming out one of the top holes of the middle bead. And what that's going to mean is that you're going to see a little bit of thread on the side of the SuperDuo that's in the middle there. I'm then going to use 2 of my 11-Os on my needle. I'm going up through the back of my button, grabbing on a SuperDuo, and then I'm going to come down the front of the button, going through the other hole of the SuperDuo, and going through the other hole of the cup button. Give a nice tight pull, and there I have it ready to go. I'm going to add 2 more seed beads on the other side, so we did 2 coming out of the button and on either side. And then whatever side my thread is coming out of that center SuperDuo, I'm going to go in the same way as the thread, so I'm looping it around in a circle basically. And that's going to put that button closure right there on the end. I'm going to reinforce that because anytime you have a clasp, you want to make sure to reinforce the thread by going back up and down the cup button and back through the seed beads that I added. You want to do that at least 1 or 2 times, or 2 or 3 times. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over along the corner here. Again, the name of the game is you don't really want to see thread. So I'm going along the side there of my SuperDuos and my beads through the last hole. And I'm going to pick up the thread here, the bridge thread that's going between the SuperDuos and the 11-Os, make a little loop, and then my needle is going to go back through that loop. And we're going to do what's called a sewer's knot. I'm going to do that knot there on the end, and then I'm going to feed back down through the side of my picot trim. I'm going to go to somewhere in the middle of my project. There, sewing back through. Again, pick up one of my bridge threads there, going in between the beads, make a loop, sew back through that loop, and do a nice tight knot. I can sew back again then through a couple more, continuing to do that. If you don't want to sew back through a couple, what you can do is you can use some glue to glue in there. And you can see sometimes it's a tight fit between some of those SuperDuos, especially with this thicker thread. Again, pick up one of my bridge threads. And I usually do this little sewer's knot about 3 times before I feel comfortable cutting off the thread. Once I have those nice and tight, I'm going to take my wire cutters, thread burner, scissors, whatever you're using, and just get nice and close and cut off to my project. So that's how I'm going to add my cup button. I'm going to flip over now to the other side, take my stop bead off, and add a needle to the side, and I'm going to do my loop to go around my cup button. So now that I have my needle attached on the other side, what I'm going to do is mimic what I did on the cup button side by adding the little beads here on the side in order to get that little finished look. So I'm going to, after taking my stop bead off, I add 2 beads onto my needle, and then I'm going to let them drop down next to the last SuperDuo by going back through the bottom hole of the SuperDuo that I'm closest to. I'm going to also at that time sew through the next 2 holes of the next 2 SuperDuos in line, and that's going to bring me to the middle of the project. To get up so that I'm coming out of the last hole, I'm just going to reverse the thread so it's coming right along the side of the SuperDuo, and it's coming right out the middle. I'm going to add 26 or 22 beads here onto my needle to make my loop. And once I have that, then I'm going to let them all drop down next to my last SuperDuo, and we're going to make our loop. I'm actually, I think, going to use 26. Let's see, 5, 10, 15, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. And that's going to make a nice size loop for my cup button that my cup button's going to fit through. Just like on the other side, I'm going to go through the SuperDuo, going in the opposite side that my thread is coming out of to make a round loop. And then I'm going to reinforce, taking my needle back the whole way through all of my beads that are part of my loop. If you want to at this time, you could also do a peyote loop. And that's going to make the loop a little bit more decorated. But I'm sewing back through all of those beads. When I come out of the loop then, what I want to do is do those half hitch sewer knots throughout my project as well on this side to tie it off. Once I tie these off and I do all those little half hitch and those little sewer knots, what I'm going to do is cut off the rest of my thread. And on the beginning side, you actually usually don't have much thread left at all. If you do get to the point where you don't have enough thread, or you didn't leave yourself a big enough tail, a good needle to use would be the large eye beading needle, because you can move the thread up and down from one side of the needle to the other. So it makes it really easy that in tight spaces, if you don't have a lot of thread, you can shift the needle around on the thread. I'm going to tie another one of these little half hitch knots. You can see I'm going back through the back side of my thread when you're in tight spots. And then once I have those knots in place, I'm just going to trim down my extra thread. And there I have my completed project. And once they're on, they look great. They have a fun pattern to them, that they have a nice design. Again, you can do this with any sort of peyote pattern, so whether or not it's 1-hole or a 2-hole project, it doesn't matter. You can still do the same pattern going away and towards the stop bead. And when they're on, this one is 3 SuperDuos wide, and it gives just a nice little band illusion to the wrist. And it's going to be a cute, fast bracelet that you can do. Again, the cup button is nice because it has the little SuperDuo color that kind of pops out at the end, and also it's nice and easy to get that button on and off. So hopefully you get an idea for the pattern. You can also start to do a zigzag pattern as well. When you're working on it, you'll be able to see the pattern. If you're not crazy about the 11 O's sticking out as much on the side, you can also use 15 O's in their place. But this is a great idea for the SuperDuos, just to give it a little bit more of a patternistic idea. And again, it goes very, very quickly. Hopefully you get a chance to also check out the rest of our YouTube videos. If you don't get a chance to visit one of our store locations, which you can find at PotomacBeads.com, you can also visit us online at thebeadco.com to get all of your materials for the different projects that we make in all of our YouTube videos, as well as check us out on Facebook, because we post things there that we're putting new videos on. We ask for your opinions, your ideas, suggestions on videos that you want to see, and we're happy to help you out as much as we can. So thanks a lot for watching, and have fun making your diagonal pattern snakeskin SuperDuo bracelet.